Good morning and welcome to Old St Andrews, Montrose for the sermon for Sunday the 26th of June, based on the passage from Luke chapter 9, verses 51 to 62. Jesus visits a Samaritan village that refuses to receive him, and then he speaks about the cost of discipleship. On the move, broad vision. It's often the case that young people were given scope to spread their wings, to have fun, to explore, to find themselves, to get a sense of what there was in the world and what life might have to offer them before they settled down. There was a bit of that, though I suspect that for quite some time now, the burden on youngsters not just to stick in at school, but to cope with the huge pressures that modern society throws at them. Pressures from the internet as well as from peers to become sucked into life-changing, even life-threatening pursuits has become huge and much greater than most of us were accustomed to in our youth. I sense too that many young people have a greater sense of responsibility for the big international issues that face us, and especially them. Climate change, world poverty, international disputes, wars, energy and food security, and much more. In some ways, the idea of settling down seems to be much more difficult, almost surreal to them. Is it reasonable to contemplate putting down roots and settling in when so much of the world is uncertain, transitory, and anything but secure? And yet, deep down, you sense that young people are as concerned about well-being and security and the future as the rest of us. But often theirs is a much less insular and individual view than ours. Their horizons tend to be wider. They're far more likely to see issues as global, impacting on the planet, not just what is going to happen here locally. Yes, and there might be an immediacy, a very down-to-earth personal concern about what they're going to wear for the leavers dance, or who's going to go with whom, or whether anyone cares for them at all. But scratch the surface, and they have very real concerns about the future of the planet, about ending poverty and war, homelessness, and improving the lot of everyone who's up against it. Settling down will seem like a distant dream, perhaps an impossible dream. So let's allow them scope to think big, to think globally, to strive after the impossible. World peace, climate and food security, to be possible. Let's be open to having our own horizons broadened too, for we need to listen to young people. The verses from Acts chapter 2, Pentecost, speak of the young having visions and the elderly dreams. And it's important that we allow our youngsters to have vision for the future and for God to be part of their experience. But so too for older generations, for we need to retain a freshness and a vision for what God has in store for them. And perhaps some of that vision and dreams of God's future might come from the insights and ambition of our young people. Are we sufficiently tuned in to one another? How could we better relate among the generations to provide one another and the world and the kingdom with a better future? There are down-to-earth practical questions, but the answers we come up with could have a significant impact for the kingdom. On the move. Jesus was spreading his wings a bit too. In this passage from Luke chapter 9, we see him again away from the familiar setting of Galilee, this time visiting a Samaritan town which was offering him a less than cordial welcome, certainly when they found out that Jesus was heading for Jerusalem. As many of you know, there were deep-seated tensions between Jews and Samaritans for reasons steeped in history. But as with so many modern disputes, sometimes the original reasons are dim and distant, and all that remains is an antipathy which is very real, inherited, but really beyond the ability of most to explain. Some of the more impetuous of Jesus' followers were affronted and asked whether they should call down fire from heaven to destroy the town. Unsurprisingly, Jesus resists. His priority is always love, that love might triumph. Now, while we may not entreat God to rain down fire upon our opponents, we maybe need to take a leaf out of Jesus' book and learn to be far more understanding and patient with those who have a different outlook to life and even to mission from ourselves. But he was on the move in another sense too, for there was an urgency about him. He sensed that his time was limited. He wanted to reach out to as many as possible with the good news. And frankly, he wasn't bothered about social conventions or historic religious scruples. He had few ties, no home or family to speak of, and while he'd largely confined himself to Galilee to date, he was moving out, he was travelling light, he needed to be on the go. And so he called on others to join him. Like the Son of Man, they were to have no roof over their head, but to be free and unhindered, to journey with him, and to take the good news of the kingdom far and near. That can be an uncomfortable message to hear, for most of us have all sorts of ties, home and family, perhaps work. It would be hard for us to respond. Are we therefore destined to be failures as disciples, or destined to be second-class believers? Hold that thought for a moment, but try not to worry. We'll come back to it shortly. Let's give a little more thought to what Jesus has to say about the excuses that people make for not following him. That might make things worse for us before they get better. One man said that he had to bury his father. Now Jesus' reply seems incredibly heartless to us. Let the dead bury their own dead. Now ask yourself, can you really imagine Jesus being so uncaring towards someone who had just been bereaved? No? Well, I can't either. There's no way that a loving, caring, kindly Jesus would have said that to a man on the way to his father's funeral. It must have meant something else. It was an excuse. Nothing less, nothing more. One commentator suggested that the man might have had prospects of inheriting from his father some way down the line, and he needed to keep in with him. Whatever the facts of the case, let's be clear that Jesus would have treated the man quite differently had he been recently bereaved. This was an excuse, and Jesus was not impressed. Jesus was offered another excuse. First, let me go and say goodbye to my family. Had that been all there was to it, I've little doubt that Jesus would have been perfectly happy for him to return and say goodbye to his family, and perhaps ask for their prayers too. So again, this was simply an excuse. Taking an hour to head home and say goodbye to the family would not have been the end of the world, nor would it have harmed the advance of the gospel. Indeed, it would have been a very loving and caring response to make. So once again, although while initially it might have sounded plausible, it was another excuse, and Jesus again was not impressed. And yet, did you notice that when another believer was very upfront with his commitment, saying, I will follow you wherever you go, Jesus didn't rush to accept his offer. Instead, he makes it plain that following him would be tough. There would be hardship and difficulty. Discipleship is more than a walk in the park. So where are we with all this? How are we to respond? Are we up for the challenge? Would we be fit for it? Or indeed, are those the right questions? Jesus is on the move, but are we? Together in mission. We are accustomed to people being picked on merit, and so while it might disappoint us, it won't altogether surprise us that We weren't and we aren't picked for everything we might have liked to have done in life. We understand that there is often a selection criteria and processes. We're not in line to compete in the 2024 Olympics in Paris, nor should we expect to be cast as 007 in a future Bond movie. But you never know. David Tennant, who became Doctor Who, had a dad who was a Church of Scotland minister. The trouble is that we can become so accustomed to people being picked on merit that we carry that forward into matters of faith. We tend to assume that God picks those who have most going for them, and, well, we are not in that group, are we? Whereas it's actually the other way round. God calls those whom he wants to carry out his work, and he equips them for the task. The fact is that he calls all of us to share with him in his mission, and he equips all of us to play our part in it. It's not a matter of us failing qualification or not coming up to scratch. God calls us, and if he needs us to do something for him, then he's well able to fit us for that. Remember, nothing is impossible for God. And that means that if God is calling us to do something, even if we are hesitant and think we're not really that capable of doing it, we can be sure that he will give us what we need to carry it off. And often the way that he does that is by teaming us up with others to do something that individually we wouldn't have managed, but which together in his strength we can achieve. Maybe you can think back to situations that you've been in the past. If so, take encouragement for fresh tasks that God might have for you in the future. If not, there's always a first time. Mission is forward-looking. God is always looking to do new things, reaching out to new people, new horizons, innovative methods, albeit with the same good news of Jesus and his love. While our tendency is to hold on to the familiar, to what's been precious to us, what's worked in the past, Jesus is on the move. His spirit is a spirit of change, of development, of planting, of growth, of new life. Young or old, we need to dream dreams and see visions, grasp the realities, not just of the challenges that face us, but also the realities of Jesus' call and equipping for the new things that he has in store. And we need to align ourselves with them, being ready to participate enthusiastically. So, no ruts, please. We've not to get stuck. No excuses either, even though most of us are pretty good at offering them. Jesus knows we're not perfect, but he's more than happy to use us anyway, and to equip us for the task in hand. No prima donnas. We're each to play our part together with others in Jesus' marvellous plan for his kingdom of love, pointing to his glory, not ours. Are we ready? On the move. May the Lord bless you. Amen.